She was fired for no reason at all, until the billionaire discovered her secret and everything changed. Before we begin, if this story moves you, hits somewhere deep, or keeps you up wondering what happens next, hit that like button and drop a comment below. Every single one of those means the world and helps this story reach someone who needs it. Now, let's go. The wheels of the private jet hadn't fully stopped rolling when Nathan Whitfield's phone lit up with 17 missed messages. He ignored 16 of them. The 17th was from Marcus, his driver of 11 years, a man who communicated exclusively in short sentences that were always worth reading. "She's gone, Mr. W. Your mother let her go this morning." Nathan read the message twice. He looked out the oval window at the bleached tarmac of Van Nuys Airport, at the heat rising in slow, wavering columns above the asphalt, and pressed his jaw tight enough that the muscle in his cheek flickered. Then he typed back a single word: details. By the time the black car had cleared the freeway and turned onto the wide, tree-lined avenue that led toward the hills, Marcus had told him everything. Which wasn't much, because the staff had clearly been too rattled to give Marcus much. And the details he did have were delivered with the careful brevity of someone who understood that the facts alone were already bad enough. Victoria Whitfield had summoned everyone to the main drawing room at 7 in the morning. She had made the announcement standing, which meant she had wanted them all to see her do it standing. No explanation, no severance discussion. A box had been prepared in advance, which meant the decision had not been made in the heat of the moment. Sophia Mercer had been handed the box and walked to the east gate. That was the part that sat in Nathan's chest like something with weight. The box had been prepared in advance. The Whitfield estate appeared ahead as it always did, white columns catching the morning light, the circular fountain sending its quiet, perpetual arc of water into the manicured silence, the hedges clipped to architectural perfection. 3 months ago, returning from Tokyo, Nathan had noticed that something about arriving here felt less like coming home and more like checking into a very well-maintained hotel that happened to have his name on the deed. He hadn't had time to think about that. He always didn't have time to think about things like that. Today the estate looked the same. It felt different. It had the particular stillness of a held breath. Mr. Whitfield. Elena met him at the main door, her hands folded in front of her with the practiced composure of someone who had spent 19 years absorbing shocks without visibly absorbing them. Her eyes were the careful neutral of a woman who had made peace with the fact that the people she worked for were sometimes incomprehensible. "Your mother is in the—" "Not my mother," Nathan said, moving past her without stopping. "Sophia, where did she go after the gate?" Elena's composure flickered at the edges. "She left through the east exit, sir. Approximately 45 minutes ago. I don't believe she had a specific destination planned." She paused. She didn't look like someone who had a plan. Nathan was already moving. He crossed the east garden in long strides, through the geometric corridors of hedge and stone that the landscapers refreshed every 2 weeks at considerable expense, past the rose bushes that were just beginning their second bloom of the season. He had noticed Sophia stopping at those rose bushes once, on her way to the laundry building with an armful of linens, pausing for no practical reason to look at them the way people look at things when they're not thinking about anything but the thing in front of them. He had noticed it, and then immediately forgotten it, the way he forgot most things that didn't require a decision. He had thought about it more times than he'd admit since. Past the stone bench where he had once found her on her lunch break, reading a book so dense and serious-looking that she had shoved it behind her back when she heard his footsteps on the path, as if she'd been caught doing something that required explanation. He had not asked what the book was. He had said something brief and professional and walked past. Later he'd wondered about it in the 2 idle seconds between a conference call ending and the next one beginning, then set the thought aside where he said all the things that didn't require a decision. The east gate was wrought iron and old money, half swallowed by bougainvillea that bloomed in violent, reckless pink every spring regardless of what the rest of the garden was doing. Nathan pushed through it and stopped. Sophia Mercer was sitting on the low stone wall just outside the gate. The cardboard box was balanced on her knees. She wasn't crying. She wasn't looking at her phone. She was simply sitting with the particular stillness of someone who has decided, firmly and without drama, that falling apart in a visible location is not going to happen. Her green eyes were fixed somewhere in the middle distance, on nothing specific. The way eyes go when a person is thinking something large and private and has no interest in performing the thinking for an audience. She looked up when she heard him come through the gate. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Sophia Mercer had worked in the Whitfield household for 3 years, 2 months, and approximately 19 days, a calculation Nathan had not made until this precise moment, which told him something about himself he didn't love. In that time, they had probably exchanged 200 words total. Professional words, appropriate words, words that existed within the clear, structural lines of employer and staff, words that had no texture beyond their function. She had always been unfailingly polite to him. She had also, he was realizing with the specific discomfort of clarity arriving too late, always maintained the precise amount of distance. Not deference, not invisibility, but distance. A careful, deliberate space she kept around herself like a room she had furnished and locked, and had no intention of showing anyone through. He had interpreted this as professionalism. He was now wondering what it had actually been. She was 25 years old, and she was sitting on a wall outside his family's gate with a cardboard box, and reading glasses, and a face-down photograph, and a small succulent in a clay pot that someone had apparently thought to give her as a going-away present. And the composed dignity of her bearing was the most confrontational thing he had seen in a very long time. "Mr. Whitfield," she said. Her voice was steady, just slightly too steady, in the way that steadiness sometimes is when it's doing double duty. "You don't have to call me that. I know." She didn't offer an alternative. Nathan looked at the box, the succulent, the photograph, the paperback book on top. Serious, important looking. The kind of spine that suggested someone who read for reasons beyond entertainment. "Come back inside," he said. Sophia looked at him for a moment that was longer than a moment. Something moved through her eyes, not gratitude, not relief, not the particular softening that people sometimes did when they were rescued from something humiliating. Something more complicated and considerably more careful than any of those things. "Your mother made her position very clear," Sophia said. "My mother's position," Nathan said, "is not the governing position. With respect, it functioned as the governing position for the last 3 months while you were in London." He could not argue with that. He didn't try. "I need you inside," he said. "There's something I found out on the flight back. Something my mother found. Something involving you. I need you present when I deal with her about it." The composure shifted again, a small tightening around her eyes, barely visible. "What did she find?" "An envelope. My father's handwriting." He stopped. Then, because half-truths were always worse than the whole thing, "It involves you by name, and it involves my father directly." The silence that settled between them after that was a different kind of silence than the one before it. This one had mass and dimension. This one was the silence of something very old and very significant, adjusting itself into a new position. Sophia looked down at the cardboard box in her lap. She was quiet for 5 full seconds. Nathan counted without meaning to. Then she stood, settling the box against her hip with the practiced ease of someone long accustomed to carrying things without making them look heavy. She met his gaze with the directness of someone who had decided something. "I'll come back in," she said, "but I want it understood. I'm not going back as an employee. I'm going back as someone who is owed an explanation. Those are different things." Nathan Whitfield had negotiated acquisition deals on 4 continents and had not been genuinely surprised by a statement in approximately 3 years. "Understood," he said. Victoria Whitfield was in the main drawing room, seated in the high-backed chair that she had always preferred in situations requiring the management of other people. A chair elevated slightly, angled toward the center of the room, with the unconscious architectonics of authority. She held a teacup she had stopped drinking from. Her silver hair was arranged with the precision of someone whose appearance was a controlled environment. When the door opened and she saw them walk in together, something moved through her face with the speed of something being suppressed. "Nathan." Her voice carried its rehearsed warmth. "You're back earlier than—" "The envelope," Nathan said. He didn't cross to her. He stood in the center of the room, and Sophia stood slightly to his left, and neither of them sat. "What did you find?" Victoria set the teacup down on its saucer with a click of careful precision. Her eyes moved briefly to Sophia, then back. "I don't know what you believe you." His handwriting, Mother, an envelope addressed to her by name. The room went very quiet. Elena was near the door. James from the grounds had come in for unclear reasons. Young Daniel from the kitchen stood frozen near the sideboard, looking like he very much wished he were anywhere else. None of them moved or breathed loudly. Victoria set both hands in her lap. The calculation behind her eyes was nearly visible, a precise woman running numbers, assessing damage, determining which version of the truth was the most survivable. She had been doing this for 40 years. She was very good at it. But Nathan had learned from her, and he knew the signs. "There are old papers," she said carefully. "Your father kept correspondence from many." "He wrote that he was her father," Nathan said quietly. The word landed in the room and stayed there. Victoria's expression did not change. The not changing was costing her something. She stood. She crossed to the mahogany writing desk in the corner, the antique one, always locked, and produced a small brass key from the pocket of her cardigan with the movements of someone who is already lost but hasn't yet acknowledged it. She opened the drawer. She removed an envelope that had once been cream-colored and was now the pale yellow of something that had been kept for a very long time in a very private place. She carried it across the room and held it toward Nathan. He took it. He looked at his father's handwriting, the deliberate, architectural loops of a man who wrote with intention, on the front of the envelope. One word, just one name. Sophia. He turned and held the envelope to her. "Read it first," he said. She took it with both hands. She looked down at it for a moment. She opened it carefully, as if the paper itself were something fragile. She read it once. Then she read it again. Then she stood for a long time, with the letter in her hands, and her green eyes moving over words that had been waiting 25 years to reach her. And the expression on her face was the expression of someone standing at the exact moment when a very long, very heavy thing finally lands. When she looked up, her eyes were dry. But the person looking out through them was not quite the same person who had walked through the gate holding a cardboard box 40 minutes ago. The door was open now. The light coming through it was enormous and difficult, and beneath the shock of it, buried deep and careful, there was something that in a better moment might be called relief. "He knew," she said, barely above a whisper. "He knew who I was." "Sophia," Victoria began. "He knew." Stronger this time. Steady. She looked at Victoria Whitfield with the particular calm of someone who has just understood the architecture of a thing that had always felt structurally wrong. "Your husband knew exactly who I was, and he brought me here anyway. He wanted me close." The silence that followed was the loudest thing Nathan had heard in years. He looked at his mother, the rigid line of her shoulders, the controlled fury in the precise set of her jaw, and understood in the space of a single breath what she had done and why. She had found the letter. She had understood what it meant, and she had made her calculation. Sophia Mercer needed to be removed before anyone else could read what Robert Whitfield had written, before the weight of it could settle into the foundations of the family she had spent 40 years building with such deliberate architectural care. "What does it say?" Nathan asked quietly. Sophia held the letter out to him. He read it standing there in the center of the drawing room, with his mother's silence pressing in from one side and the full magnitude of the thing pressing in from all the others. He read his father's handwriting. He read about a brief relationship before his parents were married, a young woman named Rachel, who had died when her daughter was 4 years old, who had left a little girl named Sophia to a system that had done what such systems do. He read about a man who had tracked a child through that system from a careful distance for 20 years, who had made sure, when an application arrived on his household manager's desk 3 years ago, that it did not get overlooked. He read the words of a man who had loved someone and lost them, and spent the rest of his life trying to make a small, invisible amend that he had never been brave enough to make directly. Nathan folded the letter with the same deliberateness his father had used to write it. He placed it on the table between himself and his mother. Then he turned to Sophia Mercer, housekeeper, employee, woman with green eyes who read serious books at the garden bench and maintained the precise distance of someone who had always known, on some wordless level, that she was standing in a room that had more claim on her than anyone had admitted, and said the only true thing available. "This changes everything." The letter remained on the mahogany table like a quiet detonation that had already gone off, its damage ongoing and invisible, spreading outward through the room in the particular way that truths spread once they have finally been said aloud. Victoria Whitfield. For the first time in the 40 years Nathan had been watching her operate in rooms like this one, did not seem to know precisely what to do with her hands. They moved from her lap to the back of a chair to her sides and back again, small, restless adjustments that she would normally have never permitted herself. He had seen her negotiate real estate transactions worth 9 figures without so much as shifting her weight. He had seen her manage the death of her husband in front of 100 guests at their home with the composed authority of someone directing a production. He had never seen her hands move like this, and the fact of it, his mother, uncertain, was almost as significant as the letter itself. "Everyone out," Nathan said. He addressed the room without particular emphasis, which made it universal. "Elena, James, Daniel, thank you." They left quickly, with the efficient relief of people grateful to be released from a room where something enormous was happening. 3 people remained. Nathan did not sit. Sophia had not sat. Victoria was in her chair with the stillness of someone who had decided that remaining seated was the only strategic position left available to her. "From the beginning," Nathan said. Victoria's expression had recovered something of its usual precision. "There is no clean beginning to something like this. There is a letter written by a man who is no longer alive to provide context, and there is a great deal of—" "He writes that he's her biological father," Nathan said. His voice was level. "He writes that he knew about her from the time she was 6 years old. He writes that he tracked her placement through the foster system after her mother died." He paused. "He writes that when her application arrived here 3 years ago, he personally ensured she was hired. He writes that this was the only way he could think to be near her without—" He stopped, looked at his mother with the specific look of someone who has arrived at a painful understanding. "Without disturbing what he'd built with you." Victoria's jaw tightened by a degree that would have been invisible to anyone who didn't know her face as well as Nathan did. "Robert should have told me," she said finally. The words came out with something that was not quite the coldness she intended. There was a rawness beneath it, imperfectly contained. The rawness of a woman processing a revelation about her late husband in real time while trying to manage a room. "Yes," Nathan said simply. "He should have." Sophia spoke then. She had been standing very still through the exchange between Nathan and his mother, holding the letter, watching both of them with the composed attention of someone taking careful inventory of a situation. When she spoke, her voice was unhurried. Not warm, because warmth was not what the moment required or deserved, but neither was it hard. It was simply direct. "Mrs. Whitfield." She waited until Victoria looked at her. "I didn't know. I want that understood clearly. I applied for this position because I needed work, and I was qualified for it. I had no knowledge of any connection between myself and your husband. I had no idea why I was selected over candidates with more experience." A pause. "I had no idea why I was brought here. I only knew that I needed somewhere to land for a while, and this position appeared." Victoria looked at her. Something shifted in the older woman's expression. Not forgiveness, because forgiveness was a long road from here, but perhaps the first involuntary step towards something honest. The reluctant, unwilling acknowledgement that the woman she had humiliated that morning had done nothing to warrant it. "The envelope was in his private correspondence files," Victoria said. "I was reorganizing after the renovation on the East Wing. I wasn't searching for anything. When I found it and read it—" She stopped. Her hands were still now. "I reacted out of fear." "You fired her in front of the entire staff," Nathan said. Victoria held his gaze. "I reacted out of fear," she repeated, with the precise firmness of someone who had arrived at the limit of what they were prepared to concede in a single morning. Nathan let it sit there for a moment. Then he turned to Sophia. "I want to ask you something," he said. "And it's not about any of this." He nodded toward the letter. "It's about the book." She looked at him with an expression that was doing several things simultaneously. Calibrating the question, registering the sideways quality of it, deciding how to receive something unexpected. "The book," she said. "The bench in the East Garden, about 14 months ago. You shoved it behind your back when you heard me on the path." He kept his voice conversational. "International trade law, that's not recreational reading." Something moved through her eyes. The particular flicker of someone calculating exactly how much to give and in what order and to what end. She looked at him with an assessment that he was beginning to understand was one of her defining features. She measured things before she gave them, precisely, the way you'd measure load-bearing weight before placing something valuable on a shelf. Georgetown, she said finally. International business law. I completed my degree 3 months before I started working here. Nathan looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the cardboard box she had set on the floor beside the settee when they'd sat down. The succulent, the serious paperback, the face-down photograph. A Georgetown law degree in international business, and she had spent 3 years maintaining the Whitfield household. Why? He asked. It was the most direct question he could have asked, and he watched her register that it was. The answer to why contained everything. The reason she had left a career she had clearly built herself for, the reason she had taken a position so far below what her qualifications suggested, the reason she had maintained that precise, careful distance from every person in a house that, as it turned out, her biological father had arranged for her to enter. She looked down at the letter still in her hands. Because I needed to disappear for a while, she said quietly. And houses like this one are very good at making people invisible when that's what they want to be. Nathan didn't push. Something new and unfamiliar in him, an instinct he wasn't practiced with, told him that this information belonged to her and would be given on her terms, and that attempting to extract it on any other terms would be exactly the wrong move. He had a talent for extraction. He was deciding in this moment not to use it. All right, he said. She looked up at him, a small, surprised adjustment in her expression, as if the brevity of his acceptance was not what she had prepared for. You'll stay in the house, he said. The East Wing guest suite. He glanced at Victoria, who was looking out the tall window with the studied distance of someone waiting for the world to finish restructuring itself. That won't be a problem. It was not a question. Victoria answered it anyway. No, she said, without turning. It won't. The East Wing guest suite had 2 windows that looked over the rear garden, a bathroom that Sophia had cleaned approximately 47 times in 3 years without ever standing in it and looking up, and a silence that felt entirely different from the silence of the staff quarters on the far side of the house. She sat on the edge of the bed and set the cardboard box beside her feet, and looked at the room with the expression of someone recalibrating everything they thought they understood about where they were standing. She turned the photograph face up. Rachel Mercer, 24 years old, outside a diner in Pasadena, squinting into afternoon light with the slightly startled look of someone who hadn't expected to be photographed. Sophia had no memory of her mother's face that didn't come through this image. Rachel had died of a fast and unkind illness when Sophia was 4 years old, which was old enough to remember the sound of someone's voice and the specific warmth of a particular kind of hug, but not old enough to retain the face that went with them. The face had come from the photograph. Everything else came from the long, patient work of imagination. Robert Whitfield had known Rachel, had known her before his marriage, had loved her in the specific way described in that letter, briefly, intensely, with the particular significance of a thing that leaves marks even after it ends. And then Rachel had gotten sick, and a little girl had entered the foster system, and a man with an empire to run, and a marriage to maintain, and an entire structured life that had no room for the complication of what he had done, had made a choice. He had watched from a distance. He had tracked carefully, quietly, from far enough away that he could tell himself he was not abandoning her, because watching was a form of presence. He had arranged, when the chance appeared, for her to come close, and he had said nothing. He had stood in the hallways of his own home and let her clean his floors, and never said her name in a way that acknowledged what he knew. Sophia looked at her mother's face and looked for something she recognized. The nose, maybe. The shape of the eyes before she squinted. There was a knock. She turned the photograph face down with the quick, practiced gesture of someone protecting something private. "Come in." Elena appeared with a tray, tea, a small plate of shortbread, the efficient care of a woman who expressed things through practical action. She set the tray on the window table and glanced at the cardboard box on the floor with the look of someone who wanted to offer to put things in their proper place, and understood that this was not the right moment to offer. "Mr. Whitfield asked me to bring this," Elena said. She paused at the door on her way out. "For what it's worth, I always thought there was something different about you. Not better, not above, just—" She searched for the word with the patience of someone who believed in finding the right one. "Complete, like you'd already figured out who you were, even here, even doing what you were doing. I'm glad you're still in the house." After Elena left, Sophia sat with her cooling tea and the word complete, and thought about whether it was the kindest inaccuracy anyone had ever offered her, or the beginning of something that might, eventually, turn out to be true. She found Nathan in the kitchen at 6:15 the following morning when she came down early to make coffee and think without being observed. He was already there, standing at the counter with his jacket still on from somewhere, which meant he had either come in from outside or hadn't been to sleep, and she couldn't tell which. He looked at her when she came in, and then looked at her coffee mug, which was already in her hand from the cabinet. "There's a full pot," he said, nodding toward the machine. "I see that. Thank you." She sat at the island with her legal pad and her laptop, and her reading glasses and her coffee, and he sat at the far end of the island with his, and the kitchen filled with the particular quiet of two people sharing a large space while being very aware of each other and not acknowledging the awareness. It was, she thought, a specific kind of silence. The architecture of it was almost familiar. She was 2 pages into her notes when she heard him shift in his seat. "What are you working on?" he asked. She looked up over her glasses. He was watching her with the careful attention of someone who had made a habit of reading rooms and was now applying that habit to a single person. It was the most directly he had looked at her in 3 years. "Research," she said. "About?" "Private." She held his gaze pleasantly. "With respect." The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but its structural precursor. "Private research in my kitchen at 6 in the morning." "Your kitchen is very quiet at 6 in the morning. It seemed like a good location for private research." "Fair point." He wrapped both hands around his mug. "Georgetown International Business Law. What was your focus?" "Cross-border trade regulation and dispute resolution." She looked back at her laptop. "With a secondary focus on corporate succession structures." A pause. "You studied succession law?" "Among other things." "And you're researching private things," she said. And this time there was a very small, very precise note of amusement in it. Not mockery, not dismissal, but the specific warmth of someone who is enjoying a particular kind of exchange, and is willing to let that enjoyment be visible for exactly a second before resuming their composure. Nathan looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "I owe you an apology." She looked up. "Not for what my mother did. That's hers to own, and she will own it. But for 3 years in this house where I was present and didn't notice, didn't look close enough to see, that you were qualified for something significantly above your position here." He held her gaze steadily, unflinching. "That's a failure of attention on my part, and I'm naming it." Sophia was quiet for a moment. She took off her glasses. She set them on the legal pad. "To be fair," she said, "I worked very deliberately to ensure that's all anyone would see." "I know," he said. "I'm saying I should have looked harder regardless." She considered this with the seriousness it apparently deserved, in the way she apparently considered most things, with genuine attention, not performance. Then something shifted in the region of her expression that was not quite a smile, but was its confident structural precursor. "That might be the most honest thing you've said to me in 3 years," she said. "I'm working on honesty." A billionaire CEO doing active work on honesty. She tilted her head slightly, with the precise degree of amusement that was exactly as much as the moment called for, and not 1 degree more. "That's genuinely not nothing." "Don't get comfortable with it," he said. "I'm usually much better at being right the first time." She looked back at her screen. "I'll add occasional self-awareness to the working file." "There's a file?" "There's always a file, Mr. Whitfield." He looked at her then with an expression she didn't have a name for yet. Something in the region of recognition. The face of someone arriving at the understanding that a thing they thought was one category is actually a completely different category, and that this reclassification changes the stakes of everything. She turned back to her laptop and did not let him see that she had noticed it. Nathan spent the first 48 hours after returning to the estate treating the situation with the same methodical efficiency he brought to corporate restructuring, because that was the template he knew for handling something large and complex and unprecedented. You broke it into component parts. You addressed each part with appropriate resources. You maintained forward momentum. He retained a private attorney who specialized in estate law. He contacted the family's legal archive. He sent his assistant 3 time zones away a list of document requests specific enough that she replied with a single line, "Nathan, what is happening there?" He did not, notably, spend much time in the same room as Sophia Mercer. He told himself this was appropriate. She needed space to process. The situation required careful handling. He was not avoiding anything. He was managing the environment responsibly. On the 3rd morning, he walked into the kitchen at 6:30 to find her already there, and on the 4th morning at 6:15, and by the 5th morning he had stopped pretending these early hours in the kitchen were anything other than the most interesting part of his day, which was an observation he kept in the interior of his mind, where it couldn't cause any structural damage to the careful management he was conducting. She was always at the island with the legal pad and the laptop and the reading glasses, and she always had coffee already made, and she was always working on the private research she declined to specify, and she answered some questions and deflected others with an elegance that he was beginning to recognize as one of her defining attributes, the ability to be completely present in a conversation while revealing only exactly what she decided you should have. On the 6th morning, she was reading a document that was clearly in French. International business law has a significant French component, he said, filling his coffee. Several components, she said, without looking up. French, Mandarin, Spanish, and Arabic for trade documentation. A pause. German for arbitration frameworks. He sat down. He looked at her. You speak all of those. Read all of them. Speak 4. She looked up over her glasses. Is that surprising? Extremely. You expected someone who cleaned your house to have a narrower skill set. It was not aggressive. It was simply direct, the way a very precise instrument is direct. It points at exactly the thing without flourish or embellishment. Yes, he said without apology. I did. That's the failure of attention I mentioned. She looked at him for a moment. Then she went back to the French document. 4 languages and a Georgetown law degree, she said pleasantly, and you're the first person in this house to have that specific conversation with me in 3 years. Your groundskeeper James once asked me if I was comfortable carrying the full laundry baskets. What did you tell him? I told him I'd managed heavier. He looked at her, the calm precision of her, the dry humor deployed with the efficiency of a tool kept very sharp for occasional use, and felt something that had been building over 6 days in this kitchen settle into a more defined shape. It was not comfortable. Comfort was not its category. It was something more like clarity, and it was pointing at something he wasn't sure he was ready to examine directly. I'm having my attorney come Friday, he said, to review the letter formally and outline what it means legally. He paused. For your interests specifically, you'll need your own representation present. She looked up. My own representation. Independent, not connected to the Whitfield family. He held her gaze. Whatever you decide to do, or not do, with the information in that letter, you should have someone in the room whose only client is you. Something moved through her expression. Careful, controlled, but real. All right, she said quietly. I'll have my assistant send you a list of attorneys. I'll find my own, she said. Thank you. He nodded. He drank his coffee. He was about to say something about the schedule for Friday when he heard the sound of heels on the marble foyer. A specific rhythm, confident and precise. The rhythm of someone who had navigated the Whitfield estate in heels before and had no uncertainty about where they were going. He recognized it before the kitchen door opened. Claudia Voss appeared in the doorway with the composed inevitability of a woman who had spent the past 18 months operating in the peripheral spaces of Nathan Whitfield's life while waiting for the opportunity to return to the center of it. She was 32, striking in the specific and maintained way that significant effort made look effortless, dressed in a blazer the color of expensive neutrals with her dark hair arranged with deliberate precision. She looked at Nathan. Then her gaze moved, briefly, with the quick inventory of someone assessing a room, to Sophia at the island. Nathan. She smiled. It was a beautiful, practiced smile. Your mother called. She said you were back and dealing with something difficult and thought you might need support. She crossed to the kitchen island with the ease of someone accustomed to moving through spaces she hadn't been invited into. I came as soon as I could. Nathan set down his mug. Claudia. She mentioned a situation with a staff member? Claudia settled into the stool at the far end of the island with the practiced ease of someone claiming territory by making it look like comfort. Her eyes moved to Sophia again, briefly, then back to Nathan, with the swift recalibration of someone who had just assessed a variable and filed it. Nathan, you know how these situations can look. If there's a legal complication with a former... She's not a former employee, Nathan said. Claudia paused. Her smile remained in place while something behind it rearranged itself. What do you mean? She's a guest of the house. He kept his voice even and matter-of-fact. The situation is more complex than my mother may have communicated. It's a family matter that's being handled. Sophia, for her part, had not looked up from the French document during any of this exchange. She turned a page. She made a small note on the legal pad. She reached for her coffee with the composed equanimity of someone who had spent 3 years maintaining perfect invisibility in rooms where important things happened and had not yet decided to stop. Claudia looked at her for a second longer than was casual. Of course, she said, smoothing her blazer. I'm here to help with whatever you need. Family matters can be complicated, and you shouldn't have to manage them alone. I appreciate that, Nathan said. He stood up. I have calls this morning. Let me walk you out. Claudia's smile adjusted by a fraction. I just arrived. I know, and I'm grateful you came. He was already at the kitchen door, holding it, with the particular warmth and finality of someone who has made a decision and is being kind about the execution. I'll call you when things are settled here. I promise. She left. Her heels went back across the marble foyer in the same precise rhythm, slightly less certain on the return than they had been on the arrival. Nathan stood alone in the hallway for a moment after the main door closed, looking at nothing in particular, understanding what his mother had done. Not an act of support, an act of architecture. Claudia Voss, dispatched to the Whitfield estate like a reminder, a beautiful, well-dressed, socially appropriate reminder of what the acceptable version of Nathan Whitfield's life was supposed to include and what it was supposed to exclude. He went back to the kitchen. Sophia had finished the French document. She was making notes on the legal pad with the fountain pen she always used, the one that had been in the cardboard box with the succulent and the photograph. She was your girlfriend, Sophia said. She didn't look up. She was, Nathan said, sitting back down. She's not anymore. No, your mother doesn't know that. My mother knows it perfectly well, he said. She just believes the situation is more reversible than I've indicated. Sophia wrote something on the pad. And is it? No. She looked up then. There was something in her expression that was doing several calculations simultaneously, and the answer to at least one of them appeared to involve him in a way that she was not yet ready to name directly. All right, she said, and went back to writing. He went to his father's study that evening. He hadn't been in the room since the week after Robert Whitfield's funeral, 4 years ago. The estate had kept it unchanged on his instructions, not from grief exactly, but from the particular reluctance of someone who has not yet decided what they want to do with a space and prefers not to make an irreversible choice while uncertain. The room smelled of old paper and the specific cedar of the bookshelves that lined the walls from floor to ceiling. Robert Whitfield had been a reader of real books and a keeper of real documents in the way of a man who trusted paper over servers, and the room contained both in the organized, deliberate way of someone who considered their filing system a form of thinking. Nathan sat at the desk. He sat in his father's chair, which was the large leather chair that had looked enormous when Nathan was 12, and now fit him with the uncomfortable ease of inheritance. He looked at the surface of the desk, the brass letter opener, the blotter, the small glass-domed clock that had belonged to Robert Whitfield's own father, the framed photograph in the corner that Nathan had always read as a landscape because of where it sat in the angle of the room. He reached over and picked it up. A woman, young, 23 or 24, standing outside a diner somewhere sun-drenched, squinting into afternoon light with the startled expression of someone who hadn't expected to be photographed. Dark hair. The shape of the face was... Nathan set the photograph down carefully. He sat in his father's chair for a long time, with the desk and the old paper smell and the glass-domed clock counting its quiet seconds around him. He thought about a man who had kept a photograph in the corner of a private desk for 25 years, angled away from where visitors would stand. He thought about the letter. He thought about what it cost a person to love something from a distance because they had decided, wrongly, irreversibly wrongly, that the distance was the kindest option available. He thought about the kitchen that morning, about green eyes over reading glasses, and a French legal document, and the particular economy of someone who gave exactly what they'd decided to give, and not one word more, and how that precision was not coldness, had never been coldness, was something closer to its opposite, the careful, deliberate preservation of something real in a setting that had not yet earned it. He sat in the chair, until the clock said 9:15. Then he stood up, turned off the study light, and walked down the hall toward the east wing, where a guest room had its light on beneath the door, and where the person inside it had no idea that her face was the same face as the photograph on the corner of his father's desk, or that understanding this fact had rearranged something in Nathan Whitfield's chest that was not going to go back to its previous configuration. He didn't knock. He stood outside the door for a moment and thought about the difference between watching something, from a distance because you've told yourself it's the kindest option, and actually having the courage to step into the room. Then he went back to his own room, because some understandings needed to arrive in their own time. But he was very aware, as he walked down the hall, that for the first time in a long time, he was not thinking about the next deal, or the quarterly projections, or the board meeting scheduled for Tuesday, or anything else that lived inside the clean, navigable geography of his professional life. He was thinking about green eyes and a French document, and the particular way a person laughs when they're trying very hard not to, and the sound of a door that hadn't opened yet. The board meeting was called for Wednesday at 9 in the morning with 7 days' notice. Unusual, and Nathan noticed. Emergency sessions had protocol. Catered breakfasts did not. His attorney, David Crane, called at 8:15 while Nathan was in the car. Someone sent materials to 3 board members yesterday, David said. Photographs of the letter. A legal summary framing Sophia's presence as a strategic position ahead of a claim against the company. A pause. The language is very specific. Corporate succession terminology. The kind someone with her exact academic background would know how to use. Nathan pressed the phone against his ear and said nothing for the rest of the drive. He sat through 40 minutes of the board presentation. He asked 3 precise, neutral questions. He gathered information the way he always did before making a move, silently, thoroughly, without revealing what he was thinking. He arrived back at the estate at noon. Sophia was in the library. Legal pad, laptop, reading glasses. She looked up when he came in. "How was the meeting?" He looked at her, at the laptop, at the legal pad, at the Georgetown succession law expertise laid over the top of the covert photographs and the board presentation and the very specific language. All of it assembled into something that looked from a particular angle, like a plan. "What are you researching?" he said. She set down her pen. "I told you, it's private." "I'm asking again." Something shifted in her expression. The careful, reading quality she brought to situations that had changed without warning. "Nathan, someone sent materials to my board, photographs of the letter, a legal summary using succession language that a Georgetown international business law graduate would know how to construct." He kept his voice level. The levelness was costing him. "I need a real answer." Sophia looked at him for a long, still moment. "You think I did that?" she said. Not a question. A statement with weight beneath it. The weight of someone who has heard this kind of silence before and knows exactly what it costs. "I don't know what to think. I'm asking you to tell me." "I told you what I'm researching." Her voice was quiet, controlled. "I told you it was private and had nothing to do with any claim against this estate. I told you the truth." She stood. She closed the laptop with one deliberate movement. "And you stood there with someone else's summary on your face and believed it faster than you've ever believed anything I said to you directly." He opened his mouth. She didn't wait. "I have been small and invisible and exactly right for whatever space I was given since I was 4 years old." The words were not loud. They didn't need to be. And when I was finally somewhere that someone was supposed to actually look at me, You looked at a document someone else wrote and made your decision. She picked up the legal pad. I've been the ghost in this house for 3 years, Nathan. I didn't think you'd be the one to make me disappear again. She set the legal pad and laptop on the desk. She walked past him and out of the library. Nathan stood alone in the room for a long moment. Then he looked at the legal pad she had left behind. He read the top page, he read the next, and the next. It was not a strategy for claiming the Whitfield estate. It was a case file, methodical, detailed, built with the precision of someone trained to construct things that hold up under scrutiny. At the top, underlined twice, Raymond Hargrove, partner, Hargrove & Sloan, Washington, D.C. By the bottom of the third page, he understood everything. He understood why she had disappeared. He understood what she had been carrying into this house for 3 years. And he understood, with the specific devastation of seeing his own behavior from the outside, exactly what he had just done. He heard the east wing door. He moved. She was at the gate. The same stone wall, the same cardboard box against her hip, as if she had always known she might need it again, had never fully unpacked the possibility of leaving. He came through the gate and stepped around in front of her, not blocking, just visible. I read it, he said. She kept her eyes forward. Raymond Hargrove, you were building a case against him. He held her gaze when she finally looked up. I was wrong, completely wrong. And I am sorry, Sophia, not as a formality, as the truest thing I can say to you right now. She studied him for a long moment with the assessment she brought to everything that mattered. Then she shifted the box, and she walked back through the gate. By 8 o'clock, Nathan knew who had taken the photographs. It took one direct question to Daniel, 22, from the kitchen, who had been waiting for someone to ask and answered in one sentence. Claudia had called him on his personal phone. She had his number from the months she'd spent cultivating relationships with junior staff. One favor, one payment, photographs of whatever document was creating the situation at the house. Daniel had done it. He had felt terrible since. Nathan told Sophia that night in the library. She listened without interrupting, which was how she received everything that mattered. With full, undivided attention, no performance. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Daniel is 22, she said. Yes. She exploited that. I'm not interested in any action against him. He nodded. All right. Claudia and your mother are different. She looked at her notes. The board presentation used covertly obtained materials and deliberate misrepresentation. That's not a gray area. No, it's not. She looked at him over the notes. I can help with that. I know, he said. Something settled in the air between them. Not resolution, not the cleared sky of a thing finished, but the first moment of two people facing the same direction. Tell me about Hargrove, Nathan said. She set down her pen. He was a senior partner at the firm where I started after Georgetown. I spent 8 months building a cross-border arbitration framework, case strategy, client relationships, documentation. He presented it as his own to the firm's most significant client. When I objected, he used his 20-year standing to destroy mine. I was terminated and blacklisted from every major firm in D.C. She paused. I had no resources left for litigation, so I found somewhere quiet to rebuild the case on my own time, while I documented everything well enough that it couldn't be dismissed. She looked at him steadily. That is what I have been doing in your kitchen every morning. Nathan was quiet for a moment. Alone, he said, for 3 years. Yes. What do you need to finish it? She met his gaze carefully. Access to the firm's internal email archives. Hargrove edited the documents, but not perfectly. Version histories, metadata, timestamps. They'll contradict his timeline. Getting access through legal channels takes time he's had 3 years to prepare for. Who manages the firm's digital infrastructure? She looked at him. I don't know. I do. He reached for a notepad. Hargrove and Sloan contracted their system management to a firm Whitfield Industries acquired 14 months ago. Their archives run on a system I own. I can request a formal audit with full legal standing, documented, defensible. Your attorneys get access to everything Hargrove thought was gone. The silence that followed was the kind that happens when something long-waited suddenly becomes possible. Why? She said. Because what he did was wrong, and I have a way to make it right. He said it without decoration. And because you built this for 3 years in the margins of your life, you shouldn't have to finish it alone. She looked down at her notes, long enough that he could hear the corridor clock marking its quiet seconds. When she looked up, her eyes held the expression of someone for whom the offer of help arrives as something that requires the rearrangement of an entire structure built around aloneness. I've been careful, she said quietly. Not to let this house, not to let you, become something I needed. Because needing things from people in power is how I ended up where I started 3 years ago. She held his gaze. I'm telling you this so you understand what it costs me to say yes. Not just to the case help, to all of it. To being in this room without maintaining the distance. A pause. That's what I'm saying yes to. Nathan Whitfield sat very still and let someone else set the terms of something important for the first time in his life. Take whatever time you need, he said. She nodded, and something at the edge of her expression, small, unguarded, unmanaged, said the rest of what she wasn't going to say out loud yet. The formal audit took 3 weeks. 10 more days for Sophia's attorney to reconstruct the document version history. The metadata told its story, with the dispassionate authority of a digital record. Creation timestamps, edit histories, user credentials. Sophia's Georgetown ID embedded in the original architecture. Hargrove's edits layered on top like paint over a signature. Obscuring, not erasing. In the attorney's conference room on a Thursday afternoon, when the reconstruction appeared on the screen in its full, irrefutable sequence, Sophia went very still. Then she exhaled. Long, slow, complete. The breath of someone setting down something they had carried for 3 years. Under the table, she reached sideways and placed her hand over his. He turned his hand over and held it. He said nothing, because nothing needed saying. Victoria Whitfield requested to speak with Nathan the following evening. She was in the drawing room without the teacup, without the managed performance of composure. Just a woman who had arrived, through a route she wouldn't have chosen, at something honest. I handled this very badly, she said. Yes. I was afraid. Robert kept something from me for 25 years. When I found the letter, I reacted to Sophia as if she were the source of the shift. A pause. She wasn't. I know that. She didn't deserve what you did to her. No. Victoria looked at her hands. I would like to speak with her, if she's willing. That's her decision, Nathan said. Victoria nodded. Then, quietly, he would have been very glad she's here. Nathan looked at his mother. This woman who had managed every variable within her reach for 40 years, and who was now in the quiet of this room, more human than he had seen her be in a very long time. "I know," he said. The morning Nathan Whitfield proposed, he had intended it to be elegant. He had reserved a private room at the restaurant on the 43rd floor. He had spoken to the maitre d'. He had organized what he privately acknowledged, with mild embarrassment, was a plan. What actually happened was that he walked into the kitchen at 6:15 and found Sophia at the island with her coffee and her legal pad. Not the Hargrove file anymore, something new, the handwriting of someone beginning a next chapter. And he stood in the doorway in yesterday's shirt and looked at her in the early morning light with her reading glasses on and her coffee mug that said Georgetown Law. And the thought arrived with the absolute clarity of something that has been true for a long time and is finally being acknowledged. "I am not doing this in a restaurant. I need to ask you something," he said. She looked up. "It's 6:15. "I know. You look terrible." "It's not relevant." He sat at the island. He did not have the ring. The ring was in the safe in his study, and he had walked directly from his bedroom to the kitchen because apparently that was the kind of person he was now. He folded his hands on the counter. "Will you marry me?" Sophia looked at him for a long moment. "You left the ring in the safe," she said. "Yes." "And you proposed at 6:15 in the morning in your kitchen." "Our kitchen," he said. "I've been thinking of it as ours for about 4 months. That's presumptuous." "Completely. I'm aware." He held her gaze. "I have 4 months of evidence I've reviewed very carefully." She took off her glasses. She set them on the legal pad. The full composure was not assembled yet. It was still the early morning version of her, unguarded, simply herself. And what was on her face was doing several things at once. Laughing at him a little, feeling something enormous. And beneath both of those, very quietly, something that had already been decided. "I have conditions," she said. "Name them." "I go back to practicing law. My own firm, independent clients, not Whitfield Industries. Obviously. We keep this kitchen arrangement, mornings here, both of us. Non-negotiable anyway." And the corner of her mouth moved. "You go get the ring before you ask me again, because I'm going to say yes, and I'd like the ring to be present when I do." He stood. He looked at her for one moment. "I'm going to tell this story for the rest of our lives." "It's a good story," she said. He went to the safe. He came back. He opened the box, a simple, extraordinary ring. "Will you marry me?" he said again. "Yes," she said, simply, directly, without decoration, the way she said everything that was true. Raymond Hargrove's law license was suspended pending a full D.C. Bar Association investigation. The digital evidence reconstruction left no room for dispute. Sophia's credentials were embedded in the original document architecture. Hargrove's edits layered on top like paint over a signature. She received a formal letter of apology from the firm's managing partner, read it once and filed it. She had never been interested in the apology. She had been interested in the record being corrected. Claudia Voss received a letter from Nathan's attorneys outlining the specifics, the staff contact, the photographs, the fraudulent board presentation, and the consequences that would follow any further involvement. She did not respond. She removed herself cleanly and without drama. Nathan did not feel the departure. Victoria Whitfield spoke with Sophia for 40 minutes in the drawing room, alone. What was said between them was private. What emerged in the weeks afterward was not warmth. Warmth was not the category available to them, but something more durable. The careful, earned respect of two people who had hurt each other and decided that truth was more useful than fiction. Victoria began addressing Sophia by name. Sophia stopped speaking to her through intermediaries. It was a beginning. Elena cried at the wedding, pressing a folded handkerchief to the corners of her eyes with composed determination. She was in the front row on the bride's side. Sophia had placed her there. Daniel sent a gift and a handwritten note. Sophia wrote back, brief, direct, the thing that needed to be said. The ceremony was at the estate, in the garden, in September. Because the estate was where the story had happened, and neither of them saw any reason to be elsewhere. The rose bushes were in their last bloom, white chairs on the lawn, the particular gold of late summer giving way to fall. Nathan stood at the end of the aisle in the suit Sophia had once looked at and said nothing, which was her specific form of approval. He watched her come down the path with the composure she brought to everything. But different now. Not managed. Not protected. Simply her, in the fullness of what she actually was, walking toward him in a dress the color of winter light. The officiant asked the question. Nathan said yes before it was technically his turn. Sophia pressed her lips together in the way she did when she was deciding whether to let the smile out. Then she let it out. The full one, complete and unguarded, the one he had been watching for since the kitchen that first morning. It was, as he had suspected for months, devastating in the best possible way. Your turn, she said quietly. I got ahead of myself. You do that. Only around you. He held her hands. I'll work on it. Add it to the file, she said. They said their vows. Simple and meant, which was the only way either of them knew how to say anything that mattered. The East Wing guest suite became a study. Her law books lined the shelves. She opened her practice with 2 clients from her Georgetown cohort and a third referral from a firm that had followed the Hargrove case in the legal press with interest. By the end of the first year, she had 9 clients and a reputation built entirely from the quality of her own work. Nathan was in the kitchen every morning at 6:15. She was always already there. He had stopped being apologetic about the hour. Robert Whitfield's photograph of Rachel Mercer was moved to the library, where it had more light. Sophia chose the spot herself and stood in front of it for a while after placing it there. She would have liked you, she said. I hope so, he said. She had good judgment about people. A pause. It took me a while to develop mine. You developed it? Partly. She looked at the photograph. Partly I think I always had it, and just needed enough quiet to hear it. What's on the legal pad today? He asked. Cross-border arbitration. New client. Complicated. Need a second set of eyes? She looked at him. You're a CEO, not an attorney. I have 7 attorneys on retainer. You would deploy your corporate legal team to help me with a private client matter. I would use any available resource, he said completely seriously, to be useful to you in any context in which being useful is welcome. She looked at him for a moment. The corner of her mouth moved. Come look at the framework, she said. They went to the kitchen. The coffee was already on. September light came in through the east windows, long and gold and unhurried, the kind that simply illuminates what is already there. She sat at the island and turned the legal pad toward him. He sat beside her and read and asked a question good enough that she looked up at him over her glasses with the expression of someone revising an assessment upward. Outside, Beverly Hills moved through its morning. Inside, 2 people sat in the kitchen where everything had started and worked on something complicated together. And the only sounds were the scratch of a fountain pen and the occasional word and the quiet, continuous turning of light through the east windows as the morning moved toward the rest of their lives.